It was a cold morning in New York, but the city was alive, vibrant as always. The sky was still a deep shade of blue, but the lights of the buildings were already shining, competing with the first rays of the sun. The walk to school was filled with that frantic energy only the city could provide, but not for him. For Alex Reed, the heir to the Reed tech empire, the world was just one big routine, without surprises, without challenges. He had already seen it all, or so he thought. The truth was, Alex had everything: money, status, power. Doors opened for him with a simple touch of his last name, and with that, a life of privilege and excess awaited him. His father, Charles Reed, a tech magnate, was an imposing figure. His name appeared in every newspaper, and the legacy of success and wealth was more than an inheritance. It was an expectation, a shadow that Alex carried every day. At 18, Alex seemed to have the world at his feet. He walked the halls of his private school like a king, ignoring rules, teachers, and classmates. He didn't need good grades. He didn't need to try. When someone mentioned a test, he smiled, thinking about the privilege of not needing to face these obstacles. He was the kind of student who, when things weren't going well, found an easy way out. The power of his name: "I'm Alex Reed. The future of Reed Tech," he would say, with no modesty whatsoever. The laughs from his friends who accompanied him down the halls echoed, and he thought that was all that mattered. But the emptiness was palpable. He was tired of it all. What did money, cars, and luxury parties really mean when he felt like he was sinking into a sea of expectations and lack of purpose? He knew his father expected a lot from him, but deep down he had no idea what he wanted from life. He felt trapped in a story he never chose. It was on a rainy morning that everything began to change. After another night of parties and drinking, Alex woke up late, which was a constant in his life. He jumped into his car in a hurry, feeling the weight of the obligation on his shoulders, but without knowing how to deal with it. The school, with its spotless halls and perfectly polished students, seemed distant, almost irrelevant. He just wanted the day to pass quickly. Upon entering school, he crossed paths with someone he had never even noticed before. She was there every day, but he had never looked at her. She was an older woman, grey hair, wearing a janitor's uniform. Her name was Evelyn. She was always in the background, doing her job with meticulous attention. But her presence was never truly acknowledged by anyone, except for Alex. But that day, something in her gaze made Alex stop for a moment. She was walking through the same door he had just entered, and their eyes met. There was something in her, a calm, a quiet strength that unsettled him. He didn't know what it was, but he couldn't help feeling that she was watching him in a way no one else did, as if she could see something in him that he himself couldn't perceive. "You have everything the world offers, but you're lost," she said softly, as if speaking to herself. The words lingered in Alex's mind as he walked away. He laughed at himself. How could someone like her know what was going on in his life? She, a simple janitor, spoke as if she held the key to something he didn't understand. But there was something about her that unsettled him. Her words, though brief, seemed to carry weight. He didn't know why, but he felt that somehow she was right. In the days that followed, Alex found himself thinking about her. Her presence, so simple, so serene, contrasted deeply with the life of excess and superficiality he led. What did that woman know that he didn't know? How could someone with no power, no status, understand something so profound about life? He began to observe her routine, always at the same time, always in the same place. He started to notice the way she did things, the care she took in her work. It was almost as if she was doing more than just cleaning the floor. She seemed to be building something invisible, something he couldn't see but desperately wanted to understand. It was then, after a particularly difficult night when he had argued with his father about his lack of focus and direction, that Alex felt an inexplicable urge. He decided to seek her out. He didn't know exactly what he wanted, but something called to him. Something inside him knew she had an answer. When he found her again, she was cleaning an empty classroom, the soft sounds of the broom echoing through the walls. He approached hesitantly. "You said something the other day about knowing you know nothing. What does that mean?" he asked, trying to hide the discomfort in his voice. She looked up at him with the same calm eyes, as if she had been expecting this question. "It means true learning begins when you admit you know nothing. When you let go of pride and the need to always be right," she said calmly. Alex was surprised by the depth of her words. He had always considered himself smart, always the best at whatever he did, or at least he was the best at appearing to be the best. But now he was beginning to realize that perhaps he had never really learned anything of value. He sat down in front of her, suddenly more interested than he had ever been. "Teach me," he said, without thinking. "Teach me to be someone." Evelyn looked at him seriously, almost as if evaluating him. For a moment, Alex felt a chill run down his spine, as if he was about to step into a new chapter of his life. "You need to let go of your pride. I'm not your teacher. I'm just someone willing to show you what's beyond appearances. To learn, you need to be willing to fail. No fear. Are you ready for that?" Alex felt the weight of her words, and for the first time in his life, he felt ready to face the truth. In the days that followed, Alex began to arrive at school earlier. He spent his mornings with Evelyn, discussing philosophy, literature, history, things he had never truly considered important. Each session was a challenge. Evelyn forced him to look inside himself, to question his beliefs and values. She never gave him easy answers. Instead, she made him question everything from the very beginning. The process wasn't easy. Alex failed more times than he succeeded, but with each failure he felt something different, a kind of freedom, a feeling of finally being on the right path. Every day he grew further from the world around him, the parties, the cars, the name, all of that seemed distant, like something from another life, a life he no longer wanted to live. Meanwhile, Evelyn constantly challenged him, asking questions that made him think deeply. How does this passage make you feel? Or why did the character choose silence? It was no longer about understanding a book, but about understanding life, understanding himself. The climax of the story occurs when Alex's father, Charles Reed, finds out about his new routine with Evelyn. He doesn't understand what's happening to his son. He doesn't see value in learning in such an unorthodox way. To him, education was about immediate results, about social and professional ascension, not about self-knowledge and inner transformation. The confrontation between father and son is intense. Alex finally understands what Evelyn meant about letting go of pride, and now he has to face the truth of his own path. He no longer wants to follow in his father's footsteps. And the most painful truth he must face is that his own identity, up until now, was so tied to his father's legacy that he didn't even know who he truly was. But when his father tries to manipulate the situation, Alex makes a definitive decision. He will no longer live someone else's life. He walks away, ready to follow his own path. The story culminates in an important speech where Alex talks about what it really means to win. He no longer needs his father's approval or his wealth to feel he has value. He has finally discovered what it means to be someone without relying on status or a famous last name. He learned that true greatness comes from self-knowledge and the ability to change. The video ends with Alex and Evelyn together, seeing the transformation he has gone through. It is no longer about being recognized. It is about being truly seen and heard. As Alex began to embrace his new path, it wasn't just his personal transformation that became evident. The people around him began to notice the shift. At first, it was subtle, a slight change in his demeanor, a softening in his interactions. He was no longer the arrogant, entitled heir to the Reed tech empire, but someone who was genuinely engaged in the world around him. Teachers noticed that he asked more questions. Classmates saw him taking the time to listen, to engage in discussions with depth, not for the sake of appearance, but because he was truly seeking to understand. The shift was most noticeable when Alex started to speak up. No longer did he sit idly by, nodding or pretending to care. One afternoon, during a history class, a question about the role of power in shaping societies was posed. Most of the class gave standard textbook answers, but Alex raised his hand. Can we talk about how the textbook glosses over the realities of power? It's always portrayed as something that is inherently good. But what about the exploitation, the people who get crushed beneath it? He asked, his voice steady, his eyes focused. The room went quiet. Even the teacher hesitated for a moment before acknowledging him. "Where'd you hear that?" the teacher asked cautiously. "From people who have actually thought about it," Alex replied. "From Baldwin, from Dubois, and from a woman who knows how to teach." That moment stuck with everyone in the room. Alex wasn't just learning, he was actively challenging the status quo, encouraging others to think deeper about the world around them. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. His transformation began to reach the other students, especially those who, like him, had been invisible in the system. He started organizing small study groups, informal sessions where they didn't focus on grades or performance, but on true understanding. Students came together, drawn by the sense of authenticity that Alex was now exuding. They discussed books, ideas, philosophies, and even the flaws of the education system itself. Evelyn's quiet teachings had sparked a revolution. No, it wasn't a revolution of power or wealth. It was a revolution of the mind, of perspective. The janitor, who had never asked for recognition, had quietly set the wheels of change in motion, one student at a time. As Alex's transformation continued, so did the tension with the school administration. Evelyn, the janitor who had become so much more than a mere employee in their eyes, had made an impact that they could no longer ignore. It wasn't long before complaints started surfacing. Parents were uneasy about the unorthodox study sessions taking place after hours. Some feared that their children were being influenced in ways that went beyond the school's curriculum, especially when those discussions led to critiques of authority, societal norms, and the traditional power structures that were perpetuated in the very halls of the school. One afternoon, Evelyn was called into the principal's office. The assistant principal, a stiff corporate type who always seemed more concerned with appearance than substance, greeted her with a forced politeness. "Miss Wallace, we've received some concerns from several parents. It's about the after-school sessions. You're not a certified teacher, and some feel that your unorthodox methods are, well, problematic." Evelyn, who had dealt with much worse in her life, stood tall without flinching. Teaching is not about certification, it's about impact. "I've had a long career in education, and the only thing that matters is whether the students are learning." The assistant principal shifted uncomfortably. "We're going to have to ask you to stop, Miss Wallace. The school cannot condone activities outside of its official curriculum." Evelyn smiled, a smile that spoke of years of experience with bureaucracy and power. "Maybe the school isn't ready for real change, but some of us are." She left the office without another word, her resolve unshaken. But for Alex, it was a wake-up call. He couldn't allow Evelyn's influence to be silenced. It wasn't just about his own transformation anymore. It was about ensuring that the learning Evelyn had sparked would continue. The following days were filled with tension. Alex knew the risk they were both taking. If Evelyn was fired, the impact would be devastating. The students who had found solace in their sessions with her, who had started thinking for themselves, would be lost. They would revert to the system that demanded conformity and blind obedience. But one night, as Alex sat in the library, writing in his journal about everything he had learned, he made a decision. He would no longer hide behind the comforts of his name or his wealth. He had learned too much, had grown too much, to let fear dictate his actions. He was going to stand up for what was right, even if it meant losing everything. The next morning, he walked into the principal's office. He was no longer the young man who had walked into the school 3 years ago, indifferent and arrogant. Now he was someone with purpose. "I'm not asking for your approval," Alex said to the principal, his voice steady. "I'm asking you to let the truth stand. Evelyn Wallace has done more for me and for many others than any textbook ever could. If you fire her, you're not just silencing her, you're silencing us." The principal hesitated. Alex's words had weight now. He wasn't the spoiled heir. He was someone who had earned his voice. The principal was caught in the bind between doing what was right and protecting the institution. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Word of Evelyn's firing spread quickly through the school, and with it, a wave of support for her. Alex's peers rallied behind him, some even organizing a protest. They demanded that Evelyn be reinstated, that the school acknowledge the truth of what she had taught them. In the end, Evelyn was forced to leave. The school could no longer ignore the revolution she had quietly started. But Alex, now more determined than ever, promised her that this would not be the end. The final chapter of Alex's journey came at the school's graduation ceremony. The event was filled with parents in expensive coats, teachers in formal attire, and students dressed in their finest foremost. This was just another ritual, another hoop to jump through. But for Alex, it was more than that. It was the moment where he would make his final stand. As his name was called, Alex stepped onto the stage. The room fell quiet, the weight of his words about to make an impact. He wasn't standing there to impress anyone. He wasn't there for the applause. He was there to tell the truth. "My name is Alex Reed," he began, his voice calm but firm. "Some of you know me as the kid who wasted a golden ticket, who didn't care who failed. They say I had everything. But I didn't have the one thing that mattered. Someone who believed in me until she showed up." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "She wasn't my teacher, not officially. She wasn't paid to help me. She had no office, no authority. She just had a mop and a heart big enough to see through my anger." The crowd shifted, some uneasy, others curious. Alex continued. "She taught me how to read between the lines, in books and in life. She taught me how to think, how to write, how to listen. She didn't just clean the floors of this school, she cleared the fog in my head." The room was silent now, hanging on every word. So what does it mean to win in life? It means waking up, letting go of your name, finding your truth, and using it to lift others. That's what she taught me. Alex looked out over the crowd, his eyes steady. "And that's what I'm going to do now. I won't be defined by my last name. I'll be defined by what I do." The speech was met with stunned silence at first, but then the applause began. Slowly at first, hesitant, but then it grew louder, more passionate. Evelyn, who had been watching from the back of the room, wiped a tear from her eye. For Alex, this moment was the culmination of everything he had learned. He was no longer the rich kid with a name. He was a man with a purpose. And in that moment, he knew that the change he had started was just beginning. In the years that followed, Alex chose to forego the Ivy League offers. Instead, he went to a small college focused on social justice and education. He knew that his path would never be about the easy route, the one dictated by wealth and power. It would be about true learning, about teaching others the way Evelyn had taught him. Eventually, he opened a center dedicated to the kind of learning that had saved him. It was a place where people were taught not just to memorize facts, but to think critically, to question, and to grow. He called it the Evelyn Institute, a tribute to the woman who had changed his life. The world may have expected him to follow in his father's footsteps, but Alex had found his own way, and with it, he had found his true worth. As Alex's new life took shape, the Evelyn Institute began to take root in the heart of the city. The humble building was an old community center that had been repurposed, its dusty walls now lined with shelves of books, and its rooms filled with students who came not just to learn, but to discover. They were there because they were looking for something different, something beyond the typical classroom, beyond the grades, beyond the resume. The first class that Alex taught was small. There were only 5 students, but they were dedicated. They weren't there because they had to be. They were there because they wanted to understand. They didn't come with the arrogance that Alex once had. They came with questions, with curiosity, with the willingness to challenge everything they had been taught up until that point. Evelyn, who had agreed to teach alongside Alex, was a steady presence in the institute. Her teaching style hadn't changed since the days when she had been helping Alex. She still asked questions, still provoked deep thought, still encouraged her students to question everything. But this time, there was more of a community, a space for students to share their struggles and triumphs. The institute became a sanctuary, a safe space for those who felt like they didn't belong in the traditional system, for the misfits, the dreamers, the ones who refused to settle for mediocrity. The news about the Evelyn Institute spread not through billboards or advertisements, but through word of mouth. It wasn't the traditional kind of education, but it was something far more powerful. Students started to come from all corners of the city. They didn't care about rankings or pedigrees. They wanted something real, something that could change them at their core. Alex had made sure the institute was accessible, open to anyone who wanted to learn without the pressures of grades, without judgment. They were encouraged to explore themselves and their interests, to dive into literature, history, philosophy, social justice, and art. Alex and Evelyn, side by side, created an environment where learning wasn't a competition, but a personal journey. As the students' confidence grew, so did the institute. More classes were added, more subjects, more students. What started as a small group of 5 quickly blossomed into a community of over 50 and then 100. The Evelyn Institute became a beacon for those who had been overlooked, for those who didn't fit into the box the traditional system had built for them. And through it all, Alex remained a humble figure, never forgetting the lessons he had learned, never forgetting the woman who had believed in him when no one else had. Though Alex had made peace with his journey, there was still one unfinished chapter in his life: his relationship with his father, Charles Reed. Charles had always been a figure of wealth and authority. He never understood the world Alex was creating, and it irritated him that his son had turned his back on the legacy he had built. Charles had always expected Alex to take over the company, to lead Reed Tech into the future. But Alex had other plans, and that was something his father couldn't accept. One evening, after months of silence, Alex received a message from his father requesting a meeting. It was a formal invitation, the kind you receive when the patriarch of the family wants to speak to you about something important. Alex hesitated. He had no intention of returning to the world his father represented, but there was still something unresolved in him. They met in a private office in one of the tallest buildings in New York, a far cry from the humble community center that Alex had come to love. The moment Alex stepped inside, he could feel the weight of everything that had been left unsaid between them. His father was sitting behind a massive desk, wearing his customary suit, his eyes cold as they met his son's. Alex didn't sit down. He stood there, taking in the room, the world that was meant to be his, but no longer felt like home. "I'm proud of you, Alex," Charles said, his voice firm but distant. "I've seen what you've been doing with the Institute. I don't understand it, but it's impressive." Alex's jaw clenched. He wasn't there for praise. He wasn't there for validation. He was there to speak his truth. "You don't understand because it's not about success in the way you see it. It's not about power or status. It's about helping people find themselves, something I never got from you, from this world you built," Alex replied, his voice calm but with an edge of conviction. Charles raised an eyebrow. "You think that's what this is? Some kind of charity work, a way to escape the responsibility of running this company?" Alex shook his head. "No, it's a way to find what really matters. To live a life of purpose, not because of a name or money. And it's something you'll never understand until you let go of your pride." His father leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what to say to that, Alex. I've given you everything. I built this empire for you, and now you're telling me you want to walk away." Alex took a deep breath. This wasn't about the company, the money, or the power anymore. "I don't want to walk away from you, but I'm not going to pretend I'm someone I'm not. I've learned who I am, and it's not someone who takes the easy route. It's someone who creates something real. You may not see it now, but the legacy I'm building isn't about wealth. It's about impact." Charles didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, he stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out over the city. "I suppose we've both changed." Alex nodded. "I think we've both learned what really matters." The conversation didn't end with the grand reconciliation Alex had once hoped for, but it was the closure he needed. For the first time, he felt free from the expectations that had been placed on him. He wasn't just Charles Reed's son anymore. He was Alex Reed, founder of the Evelyn Institute, a man with his own purpose and identity. In the months that followed, the Evelyn Institute continued to grow. It wasn't long before it garnered attention from local press and social media. Articles began to surface discussing how the Institute was redefining education, how students were learning not just to pass, but to think deeply and critically about their place in the world. Evelyn and Alex were invited to speak at conferences to share their vision for a new kind of education, one where students learned to question, to challenge, and to transform. But as with all great movements, there were obstacles ahead. Some saw the rise of the Institute as a threat to the traditional educational system, the one that prioritized grades and standardized tests. Others, including some powerful figures who had once been allies of Charles, began to push back, attempting to discredit the Institute and its unconventional methods. The final test came when the Institute was threatened with closure. They claimed it wasn't meeting accreditation standards, that it was not part of the established educational system. It was time for Alex and Evelyn to face their ultimate challenge, not just for their own survival, but for the survival of the movement they had built. Together, they fought back. They didn't just stand up for their own vision of education. They stood up for every student who had walked through their doors, every person who had come to the Institute seeking something real. In a powerful speech delivered at a public hearing, Alex spoke about the true meaning of education. Education isn't about conformity. It's about transformation. It's about learning to be yourself, not the person others want you to be. And we will continue to fight for that right for everyone who believes in it. The Institute won its battle. It wasn't just a victory for them. It was a victory for all those who had been overlooked, for all those who believed that education was about more than just passing tests. It was about finding meaning, purpose, and truth in life. Years passed, and the Evelyn Institute grew into a national movement. Alex continued to teach and run the Institute, but more importantly, he continued to learn. Every day, he learned more about the world, about people, and about the power of knowledge. On a quiet afternoon, sitting in the same community center where it all began, Alex thought about his journey. He thought about the arrogant young man who had walked through these doors, convinced that he knew everything. He thought about Evelyn, the woman who had shown him that true greatness wasn't about having everything. It was about understanding who you are and using that knowledge to help others. And for the first time, he realized that his true worth wasn't tied to his name or his father's empire. It was tied to the lives he had touched, the students who had come through the doors of the Evelyn Institute, and the impact they were making in the world. He had become someone who mattered, not because of what he had, but because of what he gave. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow across the city, Alex Reed smiled. His journey had come full circle, and he had finally found the one thing that had eluded him for so long: purpose.